And welcome back to the final video in the top 20 strongest Shinigami, Captain Class Shinigami video series. And obviously, we've dressed all of them. This is number one. And without too much shock and awe, it did come down to the fact that Yamamoto, when I really looked at it and compared, is still ultimately, in my opinion, the strongest Captain Class Shinigami there is. Now, this actual last video is going to work a little differently than, say, the previous installment, which went on for 20 to 30, maybe even 40 minutes on a couple of the videos, where I literally compared him to each character to the characters they fought and how I felt they paired against. But because we know that Yamamoto did, in fact, beat everyone on this list, I'll still talk briefly about each one, but I feel it's more beneficial to actually address the characters I think he would still win, but those characters still stand a chance of beating him. I'm talking about the characters who actually could in some circumstance beat him, but the likelihood is slim to none. We'll talk about, like, Ichibei from the last one is a perfect example. Ichibei is one of those characters that could beat Yamamoto. But Yamamoto, I think, when you do the percentages of fights, would win more times out of 100. So, with that being said, Captain Genryusai Yamamoto was the head captain of the 13 Court Guard Squad for over 1,000 years. And as he put it, there has never been a Shinigami that had been born that were stronger than him. That's why he was still the head captain even then. He was a master of every form of combat the Shinigami had, including hand-to-hand, which, by the way, he's jacked underneath there if you haven't seen him. Hand-to-hand, Shimpo, like there was few who were as fast as he was in Shimpo. Arguably, maybe Soifon, but we just don't know to compare and contrast. He could have probably at least keep up with Soifon, minimum. Kido, we saw him use level 94 Kido without incantation, which is not easy to do. And obviously Zanjutsu, the Way of the Sword, and pretty much mastered his Zanpakuto by the time we got to the 1,000-year Blood War arc. Zanpakuto Ryujin Jikai is just pure, unadulterated fire and power. His Shikai is comparable to a lot of Captain's Bankais. It's that powerful. Capable of just doing widespread flame. I can't remember the name of the technique right off the top of my head, but why don't I actually get it up so I have reference material right here. The technique he used against Aizen, which would have destroyed the entirety of the fake Kurokura town and Yamamoto himself, was enough that, yeah, it's comparable to a Bankai. That name of that technique, stupid, 1 second. There we go. The name of that technique was... There we go. I really should have had this up prior. Was Jokaku Injo. That's the wall of flames he actually uses to trap Gin, Tozen, and Aizen. No, but the technique he actually used was Enetsu Jikoku, which was flames of hell. It creates 7 or more immense pillars of flame which surround the area. They basically would cage the opponent and basically incinerate them. And then his Bankai, Zaka no Tachi, the long sword of remnant flame, basically has 4 different directions, like of the compass: north, south, east, and west. There is a Zaka no Tachi east, which is basically it's automatically activated upon its release. Basically, all the flames of the sword, and that's all the flames, are concentrated either on the edge or the tip of the blade. It neither burns nor erupts, but anything it touches is eradicated into nothingness. Even the defense of something like Wanderex Blue Vang could not stand up against this technique. He will really just incinerate things out of existence. Zaka no Tachi West, Longsword of the Remnant Flame, Remnant Sun Prison Garb, is another one that's automatically activated when he releases his Zanpakuto. His Ryatsu basically engulfs him in heat, which is to the point where you can't see it. It's not visible. But if he can make it visible, it looks like he's just covered, smothered in flames. Claiming that his body reaches the heat around his body is reaching temperatures of 15 million degrees. Basically, it becomes impossible to touch him or even get close to him because you will basically just be incinerated into nothingness. Then Zaka no Tachi South, probably one of the best techniques. Long sword of the remnant flame south. Great burial ranks at the 10 trillion fire dead. He impales the tip of his sword into the ground. Yamamoto calls upon the corpses and ashes of the dead who were killed by his flames to come forth and fight on his behalf. Like, that's just kind of messed up on so many levels. And then finally, Zaka no Tachi North is heaven and earth end in ashes. Basically just a concentrated slash of fire and heat which incinerates anything out of existence. It is a completely devastating Zanpakuto to the point where it would literally destroy the Soul Society itself just by being activated for too long. So the question became, could Yamamoto lose to anyone? Was there anyone who straight out beat Yamamoto? And the answer I ultimately came down to was no. No one actually straight out beat Yamamoto in a fight. That's at least not like majority-wise. Like anytime they went up against, or 9 times out of 10, that person won. There was only a handful of characters I could even justify beating him in a certain percentages and certain circumstances of a fight. Like for instance, Mayuri in theory, because he can plot around other people's abilities and figure out ways to work around that. In theory, Mayuri could beat Yamamoto theoretically, but the idea would have to be he would invent something that would be strong enough to not only counter Yamamoto's flames, but then, be able to dish out the damage to Yamamoto. It's unlikely that he'd be able to make something that could do both, because he's just not as strong as Yamamoto. Take out Zaka no Tachi or Ryujin Juka. He just wasn't a match for Yamamoto in any real facet of combat like that. So ultimately it came down to who were the characters I felt that in some way, some fashion, could beat him. Ultimately, it came down to like 3 major characters. One, as we spoke in the last video, was Ichibe. By the way, this is a great image of Ichibe. I wish I found this image more when I was doing the videos. I'm like, this is a great image. Ichibe being like a progenitor Shinigami, the one who created all the names of things. The one who's basically the head of the Royal Guard, who is allegedly stronger than all the Gotei 13 put together. It's clear that Ichibe, specifically also with his abilities, stands a solid chance of beating Yamamoto. Because anything he strikes with Ichimonji will have its name cut in half. If he gets hit with Ichimonji's ink, whatever is hit with the ink will lose its name, and therefore the abilities that name gave. Shigeru Fuji Ichimonji is the Bankai, could give him a new name. Absolutely. He's also got techniques that one where it makes the mausoleum. I believe it basically just peels the black off your body. In theory, all of these techniques could beat Yamamoto. But the could and would are 2 different things. The problem I saw with this scenario was when Yamamoto sees a threat, a reasonable threat, he immediately activates his Shikai, which the flames would be. Ichibe was considered 5 war potential because of his wisdom. He's not dumb enough to go up against Yamamoto in a close-range fight if he can help it. He's going to try to attack from a distance with other techniques. And unfortunately, Ryujin Juka is just that Shikai alone would keep him at a distance because of the sheer amount of power and flames. And then even if he tries to use, like, say, his Shikai's ability of, peeling the black off something, Yamamoto could just erase the freaking mausoleum he creates with Ryujin Juka, or if he really needs to, use Zaka no Tachi and then just go to town on Ichibe. Again, Ichibe actually does stand a reasonable shot of beating Yamamoto in a fight, but ultimately I didn't feel he would beat him the majority of times. Another character who stood probably a solid chance would have been Shunsui. Shunsui, it's not as good a chance as, say, Ichibe does, because Ichibe's ability is literally just could end it right there with one strike, theoretically. But what he lacks in like a one-hit kill technique, he makes up for in his diversity, cleverness, and underhanded tactics. Katen Kyotsu is one of the most powerful Zanpakuto there is, just because of its versatility and trickiness. Unfortunately, Ryujin Juka does counter a certain amount of its abilities, but honestly, a couple of the abilities, like Kageoni, definitely would still be usable with Ryujin Juka casting so many shadows. Bushagama could probably stave off some techniques. But the problem ultimately came down to Bankai to Bankai. And Yamamoto's Bankai, like, first off, Yamamoto's Shikai against Shunsui's Bankai actually would not be very good for Yamamoto. Because Rijin Shikai would injure Shunsui and then injure Yamamoto in a very similar fashion. And then, obviously, the second dawn, if you will, would cause the disease. Then there is the Abyss, which Yamamoto, he would not beat Yamamoto in that sense. And then there's the Filigrane, the suicide cutting thread. But that's all assuming that Yamamoto stays within Shikai in the fight. If Yamamoto feels that he might actually die, he will go Bankai. And his Bankai versus Shunsui's Bankai, it's a no-go on that. Shunsui tries to get in close, he will not only incinerate his Bankai, but incinerate himself into nothingness. Yes, the disease part of it might affect Yamamoto. Unfortunately, the Abyss is not going to do a damn thing. And then Shunsui's got to try to get close enough to use his cutting thread technique, his suicide thread that basically is like energy razor wire against Yamamoto. And his Bankai makes that pretty much impossible. Not to mention Yamamoto can also keep Shunsui at bay with Zaka no Tachi South, summoning the dead to fight on his behalf. It's one of those scenarios where, yes, in a certain way, Shunsui could win. But Yamamoto's kind of so hacked that his scenario isn't very likely. Last one who I felt actually had a chance to beat Yamamoto was Kenpachi. Ryatsu to Ryatsu, we don't know how strong Kenpachi is Ryatsu-wise compared to Yamamoto. It's implied, honestly, that he might have actually been equal to Yamamoto. I mean, there's no real, like, no one ever backhandedly says, oh yeah, Kenpachi, he was kind of like Yamamoto, wasn't he, in that sense? But there are some materials out there, some supplement materials that for all intent and purposes, people consider canon. For instance, the spirits are forever with you. That imply that Kenpachi might have been, not like in Soul Society arc, but come near the end of the arc, Kenpachi might have been like an equivalent of Yamamoto in many ways, at least in terms of Ryatsu. Because Aizen actually states in the Spirits Are Forever With You novel to the 8th Kenpachi, who's the villain of the arc, or that book, that trapping Kenpachi on Huecamundo was a unforeseen benefit, because Ryatsu monsters like him and Yamamoto were going to pose the biggest problems to his plans. Basically, that implies that of all the captains, it was Yamamoto and Kenpachi that Aizen knew would give him the most problems. He was actually maybe not scared, but most wary and concerned of those guys. That's a big praise on a character's part when Aizen, one of the strongest and most powerful and dangerous characters in the series, is saying, it's like, yeah, this guy would have given me problems. So, all right off the bat, his Ryatsu alone also acts like it's like an energy, like armor, like its own, attack. So it would most likely be Kenpachi could actually fight Yamamoto even with the Shikai on, because his Ryatsu would be able to probably counter a certain portion of the flames. Probably not them all, but the flames. And Kenpachi's Shikai, for what it's worth, power-wise, might actually beat Yamamoto's in terms of sheer concentrated power. It's just Yamamoto's is an elemental type, and therefore the power is distributed differently. But ultimately that doesn't really matter, because it would come down to Bankai and Bankai. And while Kenpachi, we don't know what control Kenpachi ultimately gained over his Bankai as the years followed. We can assume that he's trained with it and probably has a better control over it now. Whether or not he's mindless in it still is debatable. But we saw from his fight with Jarl Valkyrie that he can cut with such power and such force and such speed that he sliced Jarl Valkyrie from a distance. Like, he actually was able to basically cut at such a speed, power, and strength and accuracy that the wind itself that was created from the slice was the thing that cut him in half. That, and probably his Ryatsu played a factor in that too. And Kenpachi, what's the best way to put it? If Kenpachi is mindless in his Bankai still when going up against Yamamoto, there's very good likelihood Yamamoto's just going to incinerate him because he's just going to try to get in close and die. But if Kenpachi has at least some level of understanding of what's going on now, with like possibly training with his Bankai, he's one of the few who could get a kill shot in on Yamamoto without getting close because he can cut from a distance. And even though the flames or his Ryatsu are so high and burning and incinerating everything, that's not stopping us like a straight, momentum gust of slicing wind. Or the actual force of the blade slicing through the air and causing the, slice from a long distance. So while it's very unlikely, Kenpachi, I think, in a certain scenario, can beat Yamamoto as well. But other than that, though, everyone else, we can go down it real quick. Soifone, she has no way of beating Yamamoto. Nothing. His Ryatsu overpowers hers. He could incinerate her Bankai. Her Shikai is, again, because his Ryatsu overpowers hers, her Shikai really doesn't mean anything. Gin and Rose. Gin, I should have put on here. In theory, if he could Kamashini no Yari quick enough, maybe he could kill Yamamoto. But Yamamoto is no slouch. His reflexes are enough that he can easily keep up with him. So I doubt Gin would get a win. Rose doesn't really matter with his Kinshara because Yamamoto's Ryujin Jika. He can just widespread damage the area. Onohana might have been able at one point to rival Yamamoto, but I don't think ultimately that her abilities would matter. Her acid and her Bankai would just evaporate against the flames. So I really don't think she could last against Yamamoto too long, if I'm going to be honest. Then you get Shinji. His Sakanai doesn't matter against Ryujin Jika. Just doesn't. You can get Byakuya, who could put up a fight, I'm sure. Like, his Zenbon and Zakura Kageyoshi has such a wide radius of effect and, like, almost like a tsunami of blades. It might be able to stave off the flames for a while, but ultimately Yamamoto, if he had to, would just incinerate it with Zakura no Tachi. Renji, do we have to even ask about Renji? There's no way that would happen. Komamura, again, Komamura's Bankai is too connected to him. If he is damaged, the Bankai is damaged. If the Bankai is damaged, he is damaged. Yamamoto is a terrible opponent for Komamura. You then get into Kensei, close range to a fighter, not going to work out. And Tozen, honestly, Enma Kurogi wouldn't matter. Again, Ryujin Jika just kind of lights up the whole area, so he just bursts out of the Bankai. He's also probably one of the few who's similar to Kenpachi, would be able to feel the blade coming and kind of just avoid it. Shuhei is kind of interesting because his Bankai connects both Ryatsus together and basically you would end up dying together, except Zakura no Tachi could just incinerate his Bankai and then he's screwed. So nothing happened. You can't beat him there. Then you get into Toshiro, who his Bankai is we literally see his Bankai melt away when Yamamoto's Bankai activates. So no way he could beat him. Ikaku, he's too much of a melee fighter. There's nothing he could do against Yamamoto. Mayuri, as I said, again, with enough prep maybe with Mayuri, but other than that though, there's nothing he can really do against Yamamoto. His Bankai, it takes the form of a physical object that releases poison, but Yamamoto's flames could probably just burn the poison away, destroy the Bankai itself. Any drug that Mayuri possibly tries to administer, it would have to be, he'd have to get in close however he administers it, because otherwise Yamamoto is not going to be affected by it probably. If it's the loop one, Yamamoto's smart enough to figure out how to avoid doing the same thing twice. If it's the super soldier one, Yamamoto again still just keeps his Bankai his blade activated, and he could still win just by Mayuri getting too close, quite frankly. And he's stuck in a super serum for the rest of his existence, or forever long that lasts, but still. So then you get Urahara. Urahara's clever enough that he might be able to work it out. He might be able to beat Yamamoto, but he doesn't have a technique really that is designed to beat Yamamoto. His most powerful destructive technique would either be Hado 99 or the Keto Net and Zuzamushi. I can't remember the full name of the technique, but it's like the net that explodes, which is a really cool technique. I really like it. So honestly, we've seen Yamamoto survive more than that. So, and then Rukia, Rukia just can't beat him. Her Bankai in theory might be able to, but because it does everything to absolute zero, which would include flames, but the problem is that Ryujin Jaka being activated alone would be enough to offset that and cause problems for her in her Bankai, let alone activating the Bankai. And he can just flash step out there and void it. So there you go. But ultimately, in my opinion, Yamamoto came out on top as the strongest Captain Class Shinigami there is. Now, ultimately, we might change this list up if more information about characters come out. But for now, this is the list I have made. Until then, though, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. As always, if you want us to review something, put in the comments below. Let us know. We'll do a review of it at some point. And ideas for who would win, Star Wars, Super Magic, whatever. Anything to do on the channel, put that in the comments below as well. I'll get that at some point. Hit that bell if you want notifications, and I'll see you next time.